Our relationships change the course of our lives, but can they change history? I'm the Affair Archivist, and this month we'll be exploring the life of Kathleen Kennedy and the affair that brought about her premature demise. In June of 1963, President John F. Kennedy visited his ancestral home of Ireland to much fanfare and excitement. The state visit was widely covered by the press in both Ireland and the United States. While in the United Kingdom, Kennedy made a pit stop in the English countryside. This part of the journey, one which the president said was of an extremely personal nature, did not make headlines. When his helicopter touched down at Chatsworth House in Derbyshire, the president went to see the grave of his younger sister, Kathleen, who had died 15 years before. Jack was so consumed with grief when his sister died, he could not bring himself to get on the plane to attend her funeral. Kathleen, better known as Kik, was just as intelligent as her older brother, shared his magnetism and interest in politics, and was his companion in their rebellious teen years. When their father, Joe, was named the United States ambassador to Britain in 1937, it was Kik, not her father or future president brother, that enraptured the British public with her charisma and charm. Though the Kennedys considered themselves a monolith unto themselves, Kik sought to live life on her own terms, working as a journalist, and then in the transgressive act of marrying a Protestant aristocrat. Yet, Kik is an obscure figure in the history of the Kennedy family. It was they who sought to bury her story along with her. Rose Kennedy was 8 months pregnant with her fourth child when she appeared on the doorstep of her childhood home. Her parents had warned her not to marry Joe Kennedy. Though he was a man of great expectations, they were convinced he was not good enough for her, that he was a social climber, intent on using their name to propel himself further. They sent Rose to Europe for months in the hopes that the separation would make her forget Joe. It did not. Rose and Joe married in 1914. 6 years into the marriage, however, she was fed up with his infidelity and spent 2 weeks with her parents. Rose's father, John F. Fitzgerald, was a prominent politician and former mayor of Boston and loved Rose dearly. Fitzgerald, himself a serial philanderer, told his daughter, "What is past is past. The old days are gone. Your children need you and your husband needs you. You can make things work out. I know you can." As a staunch Irish Catholic, Rose certainly could not expect to leave her husband permanently, so she returned, digging deeper into her faith to steel herself against her husband's unchanged behavior in the decades to come. Shortly after, Kathleen Kennedy was born on February 20th, 1920, in Brookline, Massachusetts. She was the fourth of Rose and Joe's 9 children. Kik earned her nickname when her younger siblings struggled to pronounce Kathleen. Perhaps to live up to it, she developed the habit of kicking off her shoes. This signature move was symbolic of Kik's effervescent personality. She was extroverted, talkative, and a friend later wrote that wherever Kathleen went, sunshine followed. Rose later stated that Kik was her father's favorite child. Joe Kennedy later said, "All of my ducks are swans, but Kik was especially special." Kik was always trying to compete with her older brothers, even as a toddler, and didn't shy away from playing sports or other activities typically reserved for boys. She also took on a motherly role for her younger siblings, as her older sister, Rosemary, suffered from intellectual disabilities. The Kennedy children were mainly raised by their Irish nanny. Jack recollected that their mother hardly touched them unless she was doling out a spanking, which left him traumatized. Joe was a successful businessman. He made the bulk of his fortune in the stock market, and later became involved in the movie business. His greatest aspiration, however, was to have a career in politics. As the prominence of the Kennedy family increased, Rose saw her family as role models of what the perfect Catholic family should be, and was eager to avoid scandal at all costs. Her own father's political career was disgraced after one of his affairs was made public. However, Joe was so flagrant with his mistresses that it wasn't enough for him to be seen out on the town with other women. He brought them home to the dinner table or to family vacations on the Cape. His most famous mistress, Gloria Swanson, visited the family in Hyannisport one summer. Though she was once Kik's favorite movie star, the 8-year-old later insisted in school that she preferred Constance Bennett. As she grew older, Kik became her mother's defender, scolding her beloved father for his betrayals, and admonishing her older brothers for teasing their mother's devotion to proper form and protocol. Kick's upbringing was mainly confined to the Kennedy family themselves. Rose and Joe barely had any friends, and the family mainly stuck together. As a result, the Kennedy children became natives of the Kennedy family, first and foremost, before any city or any country, Rose once told Reader's Digest. Despite this, Kick made friends easily and was very popular in school. As a tween, she went to the movies and parties with her friends, and had a roster of boys she'd chat on the telephone with. This was a cause of concern for Rose, as she wanted her daughter to be a perfect Catholic girl. As a result, Kick was sent to Sacred Heart Convent in Connecticut to receive her education. The convent was a fortress with high walls on a small peninsula on the Long Island Sound. "Now I suppose you're glad you have me stuck behind convent walls," Kick wrote in a letter home. The expectations were high, and only girls from elite Catholic families gained entry. Kick hated the rigid rules of the school, and found ways to avoid sending her letters out without being read and censored by the nuns. Jack, attending Choate, an elite all-boys school nearby, would sometimes visit with his friends, who were immediately enthralled with Kick. Joe Sr. spoiled Kick even as she was away at school, buying her fancy dinners, dresses, ski trips during school breaks, even pulling strings to get her special perks. Later into her teen years, Kick displayed more of her rebellious streak, intent on breaking away from the typical Kennedy woman role her mother had tried to cast her in. During her summers home in Hyannisport, she and Jack often snuck out of the house together to go to the movies or parties, turning the headlights off of their car as they would pull into the driveway so their parents wouldn't notice. Rose would leave a note on Kick's pillow the following morning, letting her know that she knew what was going on. She would also leave notes when Kick would leave her clothes strewn all over her bedroom floor, or when she would forget to wipe her lipstick off before bed, leaving stains on her pillowcase. Despite this, Kick didn't change her behavior much. While attending finishing school in France, Kick earned the nickname Mademoiselle Pourquoi because she frequently questioned and rebelled against the rules. She did well academically, but found the rules and protocol of her convent schools to be stifling. As Kick matured, she attracted more and more male attention, but unlike her brothers, it was forbidden for her to engage in any premarital sex whatsoever due to their Catholic upbringing. Joe encouraged their sons to become sexually active and left pornography on Jack's bed to egg him on. Jack was not amused by this. However, when Kick would join Jack and his friends on their jaunts in New York City to the Cotton Club, their parents were appalled, worried about the damage that could be done to their daughter's reputation. They feared that Kick was partying too much and would be labeled a loose woman. During President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's re-election bid in 1936, Joe Kennedy campaigned on the president's behalf. As compensation for helping his re-election efforts, FDR appointed him American ambassador to England in 1937. Kick spent much of her later teen years in Europe and became very cultured and worldly as a result. She fell in love with England in particular. Though she had enrolled in Parsons, she dropped out to join her family in London in March of 1938. "I guess I'm off to find my destiny," she wrote to a friend. When the Kennedys arrived in London, they sparked a media sensation with the English press, who were enchanted by the young American family, an immigrant success story. 18-year-old Kick in particular captured the media's attention. The press took interest in her love life, speculating on potential romances and engagements. Though she was not considered at the time to be a conventional beauty, her charisma shone through whatever so-called physical flaws it may have been said she possessed. The Kennedys moved into a mansion near Hyde Park and renovated the home, threw parties, and shipped in their favorite American products such as coffee, candy, and cough medicine. The season was just beginning that spring, and Kick was set to make her debut in London. It was a whirlwind of balls, dinners, teas, and races. All of the loneliness I had for America has disappeared because now England seems so very jolly. Kick stood out amongst the more demure and meek English girls, unafraid to share her opinions, bright, inviting, and self-assured. Kick told funny anecdotes, but often struggled to get to the punchline through her laughter. This quirk further attracted people to her. She was also loved for her unpretentiousness. When Kick had a question about protocol, she would ask her English girlfriends, "Okay, so what do I do now?" She may have charmed the public and the press, but there was still tension given that most of the English aristocrats Kick was hanging out with were Protestant, and she was Catholic. When staying with friends in the English countryside, Kik had a series of practical jokes played on her, including the theft of all of her left shoes, which were hidden in a maze. Her habit of kicking off her shoes was not well received by the prim English set, so one of them played this prank on her in retaliation. Yet, Kik didn't let it get to her. She confidently waddled into breakfast wearing 2 pairs of right, mismatched shoes, and earned their respect. On the 2nd of June, 1938, Kik and her sister Rosemary made their debuts at their coming-out ball at Prince's Gate. The photos of Kik with her mother and sister, wearing ostrich feathers in their hair and looking incredibly glamorous, once again captured the attention of the English and American press. They met the King and Queen, and the evening was a huge success. Despite there being more beautiful debutantes that year, Kik made her mark and rose above the rest as a star of the season. It didn't take much for her to be pursued by a string of young English peers. Kik wrote of this time. Very chummy and much gaiety, dukes running around like mad freshmen. Deborah Mitford, her future sister-in-law and the youngest of the famous Mitford sisters, would later say, vital, intelligent, and outgoing, Kik was able to talk to anyone with ease, and her shining niceness somehow ruled out any jealousy. Suitors appeared instantly, but I noticed from the start that none of the girls was annoyed by her success, and I never heard a catty remark made behind her back. Many suitors she may have had, but one in particular stole Kik's heart. William Cavendish, Marquess of Hartington, stood to inherit the dukedom of Devonshire, one of the highest positions in all of Britain, and was considered one of the country's most eligible bachelors. When he and Kik met at a dinner party in June of 1938, they were immediately enthralled with one another, ignoring everyone else in the room, conversing only with each other for the entirety of the evening. Billy was 6'4", studying history at Trinity College, and planned to go into politics after university. He was described as rather sleepy, and was not exactly the live wire that Kik was. Nonetheless, it seems this was a case of opposites attracting, according to Billy's younger brother Andrew. It was difficult for each to imagine the existence of the other. They were so utterly different. They adored being with one another, because each was a constant surprise to the other. What were they going to find out about this person? What was this person going to do next? After they met, Kik added newspaper clippings of Billy to her scrapbook. She was smitten, and her feelings were reciprocated. They were inseparable that summer, with Kik blowing off a family trip to Cannes to be with Billy. When she refused to join her family for another outing to attend Billy's coming-of-age party, Rose and Joe put their foot down and forbid her from attending. There was a formidable obstacle standing in the way of Kik and Billy's romance. Kik was Catholic, and Billy was Protestant. For both families, the prospect of this interreligious pairing was objectionable, even sacrilege. Billy's father was totally against it, as was Rose. Billy's mother, Lady Alice, saw something in Kik. She was Billy's foil, possessing the vitality and strength that he somewhat lacked, especially for a young man who aspired to politics. Lady Alice believed that Kik would help Billy find his voice, and supported their romance. At a celebration for his 21st birthday at the Savoy Hotel, his extended family was horrified when Kik was seated to Billy's right, the place of honor. Alice was the one who put her there, stating to all in attendance that she supported her son's new romance, and everyone else kept quiet. Still, Billy's father insisted that it was his duty to marry a Protestant and raise his children in the same faith. Another major obstacle loomed over Kik and Billy's love affair. Kik wrote in her diary in September of 1938, "All you can hear or talk about at this point is the future war which is bound to come. I'm so darn sick of it." As London fell in love with Kik, and Kik fell in love with London, the road to World War II drew closer and closer. In September of 1938, war was evaded with Germany when Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain signed a deal with Adolf Hitler that allowed him to take the Sudetenland as long as the dictator stopped invading countries after that, which, as we know, did not happen. Joe Kennedy's public support of the Munich Agreement, as well as his devotion to isolationism and his belief that England would lose should it go to war with Germany, drew much controversy to the previously popular Kennedy family. Joe's assertion that democracies and dictatorships just needed to learn how to get along did not sit well with FDR either, who did not want people to get the idea that America supported appeasement. These statements would not bode well for Joe's reputation and political career once the war broke out. Throughout the autumn of 1938, Kik and Billy continued courting one another. That October, Kik went to Chatsworth House with Billy, the palatial mansion that Billy would one day inherit. Kik was overwhelmed with the beauty of the estate and gardens. She and Billy were truly falling in love. They shared a passion for politics and history, often engaging in lengthy conversations about these topics. He didn't have to worry about Kik marrying him for his wealth or status. She had a sizable trust fund, and often made fun of his title. Being a duke is something of a joke, isn't it? It's like being a cartoon character, no? Billy, shaking off his self-seriousness, laughed at this quip. His lack of pretentiousness drew Kik to him. Still, Jack and Joe Jr. were confused about what their sister saw in the reserved, languid Marquess. Rose convinced herself that Kik's relationship with Billy was nothing more than a passing flirtation, a misconception Kik was eager to maintain. In March of 1939, the Kennedys traveled to Rome to attend the coronation of Pope Pius XII. Kik wrote an article about this experience that was published by the League of Catholic Women. This sparked an interest in journalism in Kik, a path she would pursue in the coming years. While they were in Italy, Hitler marched into Prague, violating the Munich Agreement. The prospect of war was all the more palpable. Billy, as well as countless other young men, volunteered for duty in anticipation of the inevitable. Back in London, Kik threw a party in which Billy and his friends were in attendance. Joe, causing huge embarrassment to Kik, showed graphic footage of the First World War to the young men, assuring them that they would be gunned down like the soldiers in the clips if war came. It was an extremely off-putting moment, but one that signaled his delusional approach to the situation. Joe continued insisting that peace must be brokered with the Germans, despite it becoming an increasingly unpopular opinion. Even more concerningly, he believed that Germany would win the war and establish a new world order in the aftermath, one that he believed would be an improvement. Kik strongly disagreed with her father's beliefs. That summer, the young men of London society were intent on living in the moment, staying out late, drinking heavily, racing fast cars, and having premarital sex, in anticipation of the outbreak of war. Kik was appalled by the latter, though she also loved to dance and party. She was also adamantly against birth control, a topic she had passionate debates about with her friends. It seems that her father's infidelity left her with some issues when it came to sex and relationships. As she once told a friend, "That's what all men do. You know that women can never trust them." On August 15, 1939, the Boston Globe published an article entitled, "Kennedy Girl May Wed a Peer." Though they denied it, Kik and Billy were discussing marriage, yet knew that it would take a great deal of convincing for both of their families to make it happen. Ultimately, it was world events, rather than their differences of religion, that would drive them apart. On September 1st, 1939, Hitler invaded Poland, and Britain declared war. As London geared up for the carnage that would soon come, Joe made arrangements for his family to leave England. He would stay behind with Rosemary, who was thriving at a school she was attending in London. Kik, despite her protests, left on September 12, 1939. After her departure, she wrote to Joe, "Thanks a lot, Daddy, for giving me one of the greatest experiences anyone could have had. I know it will have a great effect on everything I do from here in." Her future with Billy would remain uncertain for years. "It all seems like a beautiful dream," she wrote of this time in her life. Rose was relieved that they were leaving, not just because of the war, but because she wanted to get Kik away from Billy. After FDR was reelected in 1940, Joe resigned from his post as ambassador to England in disgrace. His political career would never recover, so he invested his time and effort into grooming his eldest son, Joe Jr., for a political career. Meanwhile, Kik desperately schemed for ways she could worm her way back to England to be with Billy again. "I am nearly going mad. I am so anxious to go back that I can hardly sit still." In the interim, she attended college for a time, but dropped out to take a job as a research assistant at the Washington Times-Herald. She moved to Washington, D.C. for the position, and soon began a situationship with a reporter 10 years her senior, named John White. White was Harvard-educated, but from a working-class background. He was also a socialist, who exposed Kik to new ideas and new ways of looking at the world. They had an interesting dynamic, in which they would often insult each other in jest. He was surprised at how much Kik knew about his personal life so quickly into their relationship. When he mentioned this to her, Kik nonchalantly told him that her father hired private investigators to vet all of his children's romantic prospects. Back in Europe, Billy came back from France traumatized by what he had seen. He was on the Maginot Line during the Blitzkrieg and was missing and feared dead in the weeks after Dunkirk. He managed to escape the Nazis by driving to the coast of France and was evacuated back to Britain. The fact that the British were forced to retreat haunted Billy. "We ran away," he told his cousin repeatedly. Kik was relieved when she received word that he was safe. They did write, but his letters became less frequent as time went on. Then, Kik received a Dear John letter from Billy. While she was internally devastated by this, she put up a brave front. Rather sad, don't you think? She felt he was weak for not waiting for her. Soon after, Kik learned that Billy was engaged to another woman. Yet, Billy wrote to Kik, "I've never been engaged before, thanks to you. It was a very long time before I gave up all hope of marrying you." He also encouraged her to keep writing, clearly showing that his feelings for her were still there. She begged Joe to let her go back to England and try to obtain a passport. Her father once again refused, and Kik finally resigned herself to losing Billy. She continued to see John White, and he fell for her, yet she refused to even kiss him, despite his numerous attempts at a romantic interlude. They had more of a close friendship than a romance. Kik told him, "Listen, the thing about me you ought to know is that I'm like Jack, incapable of deep affection." Soon after Pearl Harbor was attacked and the United States entered the war, Billy wrote to Kik informing her that he had broken off his engagement. She was his true love, plus his family did not approve of his previous fiancée, believing her to be beneath him. Kik's desire to return to England was reinvigorated. She had been promoted to a reporter at the newspaper and applied to work as a correspondent in London in a bid to return to Billy. She did not get the position. Kik's English friends wrote to her, trying to convince her to come back and marry Billy. She asked her brother for advice. Jack told her, "I would strongly advise against any voyages to England to marry any Englishman, for I have come to the reluctant conclusion that it has come time to write the obituary of the British Empire." In the summer of 1942, Kik vacationed with White and finally let him kiss her under the water as they swam in a pool on the Cape. On this trip, he met the Kennedy family, but it did not go well. Their relationship ended soon after. Nearly 4 years after she left England, Kik was on her way back. She volunteered for the American Red Cross, and after her father pulled some strings, she was assigned to work in London. She arrived in June of 1943. Unlike her first arrival, she left the ship in her uniform without much fanfare. Her motivations in joining the Red Cross and becoming a donut dolly were questioned, so much so that one of Kik's friends had to sign a form verifying that Kik was not just joining to return to London to be with her boyfriend. Furthermore, Kik received some backlash from the English due to her father's problematic stance on appeasement and the British war effort. This hurt her, as she had always been pro-England and believed they would defeat Germany. Joe encouraged her not to worry, that she was not responsible for his issues or opinions. The Daily Mail published a photo of Kik on her bike. She earned the nickname of the girl on the bicycle. The photo was symbolic of the joint British and American effort to win the war. 2 weeks after her arrival, she received a telegram. "Reach London, 7:15 Saturday, staying at Mayfair. Can you keep Sunday free? Billy." On leave, Billy reunited with Kik on July 10, 1943 at the Crescent Club. They still loved each other despite all the years they spent apart. They spent one full day together at Compton Place after a quick meeting in London. "For 24 hours I forgot all about the war." In a letter to Jack, Kik wrote, "Billy is the same, a bit older, a bit more ducal, but we get on as well as ever." Anticipating that he would be sent back to the front, Billy wanted to marry Kik, but the elephant in the room stopped him. He knew he would have to ask her to give up her religion, and that their children would have to be raised Protestant. He wasn't quite ready to ask this of her yet. He finally worked up the courage to ask her during Christmas of 1943, when Kik spent the holidays with the Cavendishes. He did have one major condition, however. Their children would have to be raised Protestant. Kik took a while to contemplate this decision. She loved Billy dearly, but her faith was also incredibly important to her, and she knew she did not exactly have her parents' blessing either. Adding even more pressure, the interfaith marriage was considered by the Catholic Church at this time to be invalid, and if Kik married Billy, she would be living in sin, which Kik found incredibly distressing. According to Catholic law, Kik would not only be living in sin, she would be unable to take Holy Communion, make confession, and she and her children would be damned. The enormity of the decision that lay before her weighed on her. In early 1944, Billy's father convinced him to run for a seat in Parliament in an attempt to keep his son and heir out of the war. Though he was eager to rejoin his unit, Billy agreed, and Kik was by his side throughout what was a very trying and demoralizing campaign. Billy ran under the Conservative Party. Throughout his campaign, his lineage came under great scrutiny from the working class, who were eager for a change in the social order of Britain once the war ended, no longer content for a society in which only the wealthy and influential had a say. Billy was defeated, and his unsuccessful campaign was a harbinger of things to come in post-war England. Still, through this experience, Kik found a lot of meaning and purpose in helping Billy. She admired his distant relative, Georgiana, former Duchess of Devonshire, who was a political confidant to her husband, and hoped to be the same for Billy. Most of all, she wanted to be a woman of influence and make her mark apart from the Kennedys. Billy took this defeat in stride, stating, "Better luck next time," cementing his intentions to run again after the war. Finally, in the spring of 1944, Kik made her decision. She was going to marry Billy Cavendish. Though Joe tried to get her a special dispensation from the Catholic Church, his efforts failed. Kik decided this was not going to deter her. She and Billy would marry in a civil ceremony and make things right with the Catholic Church afterwards. She sent a letter home in late April, letting her family know of her plans. Joe wanted to support Kik, but felt that Billy should make some concessions on his end. Rose was upset. She wrote, "Naturally, I was disturbed and horrified, heartbroken. She wondered what she had done, or failed to do, to allow this to happen, and what could still be done to prevent it. I thought it would have such mighty repercussions in that every little girl would say, 'If Kathleen Kennedy can, why can't I? Why all the fuss?' Then everyone pointed to our family with pride as well-behaved, level-headed, and deeply religious. What a blow to the family prestige." Once again, Rose's primary concern was how this could erode the facade of piousness she worked hard to cultivate within her family. Rose didn't have any concerns about how her husband and son's womanizing ways made her perfect Catholic family look, however. Billy wrote to Rose, assuring her of his love for her daughter, and that his duties and privileges made it impossible not to raise his children Anglican, and acknowledged Kik's sacrifices. This didn't make her feel any better. Billy's father, however, had come around. "Bill's tenure of life is so uncertain that I should feel almost like a murderer if I refused him the chance of being happy while he can." On May 6, 1944, Kik and Billy married in a civil ceremony in London, and Kik became Kathleen, Marchioness of Hartington. Kik's friends pooled together their clothing ration coupons so she could buy a wedding dress. Kik's wedding ring had an inscription on it from Billy that said, "I love you more than anything in the world." Joe Jr. was the only Kennedy in attendance. "Everything wonderful. Don't worry, she's very happy. Wish you could have been here," he said in a telegram home. When neither of their parents responded, Kik was heartbroken. Joe sent another telegram to his parents. "The power of silence is great." Rose was hospitalized for a routine physical checkup where she would remain for 2 weeks after Kik's wedding. It was mainly a ruse to keep the press from hounding her about the marriage, but perhaps also a ploy to make her daughter feel guilty. Her only statement on her daughter's marriage was that she was physically unfit to discuss the wedding with anyone. Kik was shocked by her mother's dramatic display. Joe finally responded, stating that while her mother was distressed, he was happy for her. It would take her mother 2 months to get over it and send her daughter a letter of congratulations. Kik received hate mail from angry Catholics, who accused her of selling her soul for a title. Through her and Billy's separation, Kik maintained her commitment to remaining a virgin until marriage, but her wedding night turned out to be a disappointment. When they arrived in their hotel suite, the 2 twin beds in the hotel had been pushed together. Billy pulled them apart, much to Kik's horror. Luckily, Kik wrote to a friend during their honeymoon that they finally figured out how to do it. Kik and Billy spent only 5 weeks together following their wedding. During this time, the Allies invaded France. Billy had to return to combat. They made plans for their lives after the war, yet uncertainty loomed. "This love seems to cause nothing but goodbyes," Billy wrote to Kik. He was on his way to France. That summer, Kik made her first public appearance as the Marchioness of Hartington, winning everyone over, even the anti-Catholics. Her father-in-law wrote to Joe, stating that if Billy couldn't win a seat in Parliament, Kik would do it for him. In July, Kik received a letter from Billy that caused her a great deal of anxiety. I have been spending a lovely hour on the ground, thinking in a nice, vague, sleepy way about you and what a lot I've got to look forward to if I come through this all right. I feel I may talk about it for the moment, as I'm not in danger, so I'll just say if anything should happen to me, I shall be wanting you to try and isolate our life together, to face its finish, and to start a new one as soon as you feel you can. I hope that you will marry again, quite soon, someone good and nice. On August 12, 1944, the first of many tragedies befell the Kennedy family. Joseph Kennedy Jr. was killed when his plane exploded over England during a classified mission. Kik was devastated and returned to America, which upset her in-laws, who felt it was her place to remain in England should Billy be granted leave. Some speculated she couldn't handle the bombing and death happening in Europe and wanted to escape. When Jack picked her up from the airport, Kik was shocked at the toll his service in the South Pacific had taken on him. He was emaciated, his skin yellow, and still recovering from malaria. Jack wrote that while Kik was grieving her brother, her happiness shone through her sadness and helped to ease her parents' pain to some degree. Part of Kik's motivation for going home was not just to be with her family during their time of mourning. She wanted to fix her relationship with her mother, but this didn't exactly work out. Rose gave her pointed looks of sadness and passive-aggressively suggested they attend Mass together. It was clear she was not over it. In early September, Billy wrote to Kik recounting the triumphant liberation of Brussels, which was vindication for him. 4 years earlier, he had witnessed the deaths of soldiers and civilians at the hands of the Germans, which had haunted him ever since. He finally felt the English redeem themselves by pushing forward to liberate the continent. Billy showed a great deal of calm and courage under fire, which inspired his men. He refused to wear a helmet to show he was unafraid of the enemy and death. He was an officer and wore a different uniform than the lower-ranking soldiers. This difference often made men in Billy's position targets for the sniper's bullet. On September 9, 1944, when Billy was throwing a grenade into a barn full of German soldiers, he was shot in the head by a sniper in Heppen, Belgium. Billy was buried near where he fell. His parents were notified via a telegram that was addressed to Kik. They sent word to America as soon as they could, but for some reason their message was delayed. A week later, Kik was on a shopping trip, about to meet Eunice for lunch, when her sister insisted that she come to the Waldorf Astoria to see their father, who broke the news to her. Kik was devastated. She sent a telegram to the War Office in London to confirm if it was really Billy who was killed. So ends the story of Billy and Kik. Life is so cruel, she wrote. Jack stayed with Kik in her hotel room to be there for her. He said it was the worst night of his life. Rose prayed and went to Mass after Billy's death, but in her mind, Billy died as a result of the sin he and Kik committed by marrying, and cleared the way for her to put Kik back in God's good graces. A first love, a young love, is so wonderful, my dear Kathleen, but, my dearest daughter, I feel we must dry our tears as best as we can and bow our head to God's wisdom and goodness. We must place our hand in His and trust Him. After Billy's death, Kik felt even more justified in her decision to marry him. I thank God every night I married him, and I think it must have been God's way of making Billy's life, though short, completely happy. Her mother-in-law also wrote her poignant words of comfort. All of your life you must think you brought complete happiness to one person. He wrote that to me when he went to the front. All your life I shall love you, not only for yourself, but that you gave such perfect happiness to my son, whom I loved above anything in the world. My heart breaks when I think of how much you have gone through in your young life. Joe, showing his materialistic and mercenary sides, comforted Kik by buying her gifts and suggesting she write a memoir. Mother and I were talking it over last night and decided that nobody in the world 25 years of age has had the kind of life you've had or as interesting. If you haven't kept a good diary of all this material, you've robbed yourself of another thrill that is writing a book. I'm sure you can make enough out of that to buy all the clothes and jewelry you want in Paris for many a year and, in addition, have a most interesting contribution to make to the literary field. Kick returned to Compton Place, the home that would have one day been hers had things turned out differently, to grieve with her in-laws. Billy's sister slept beside her bed as she cried in the night. Kick wrote, "I feel like a small cork that is tossing around." In May of 1945, Kick dealt with some difficult feelings amidst the jubilation of a victorious England. Of course, she was glad the war was over, but it only reminded her of the fact that her husband was never coming home. She was unsure whether she should stay in England or go back to America. The Kennedys believed their daughter would come home now that she was a widow. However, Kick ultimately decided to make England her permanent home and bought an apartment in Westminster. Joe afforded Kick a far more independent life than he did his other daughters, and even bought her a private plane so she could visit America more frequently. She was still determined to carve out her own place in the world, writing to a friend, "Life holds no fears for someone who has faced love, marriage, and death before the age of 25. It's hard to face the future without someone who you thought would always be there to help and guide and for whom you'd sacrifice a lot. Luckily, I am a Kennedy. I have a very strong feeling that makes a big difference about how to take things. I know we've all got the ability to be not got down." Nevertheless, Kick's political aspirations were dampened by Billy's death. Though she dreamed of being a woman of influence, she was a woman and could not launch a political career of her own because of the time she lived in. Instead, she set up a political salon in her apartment, which became a meeting place for many of London's most influential people. After losing the 1945 election, Winston Churchill became her next-door neighbor, and when he complained of the lack of eggs in London, she brought him some from the countryside. She made speeches and impressed everyone with her public speaking abilities. She wanted to help Jack launch his political career, but her family discouraged her, concerned about how her reputation amongst Irish Catholics could negatively impact Jack's prospects. Kick lived an independent life in London as Lady Hartington, wearing fine clothes and jewelry, and courting more male attention than she ever had before. She dated other men, but none had the same hold on her that Billy did. Richard Wood, son of politician Lord Halifax, loved Kick for years. He was disabled in the war, and felt like he couldn't be with her. However, he did ask Kick to marry him, and without the burden of becoming a duke, he said they could raise their children Catholic. Kick thought about it, but decided not to marry him. As an old man, he said he still thought about Kick Kennedy every day. Kick's fate was altered irreversibly in June of 1946, when she attended a ball in honor of the Commandos Regiment that served bravely during the war. It was there that she met Lord Peter Fitzwilliam, the 8th Earl of Fitzwilliam. He asked Kick to dance with him, right in front of his wife, Olive. He had Irish roots like Kick, and owned a sizable estate there, as well as one of the largest homes in all of England. He was a war hero and an adrenaline junkie, using his wealth to fund gambling, car racing, and philandering. It seems that Fitzwilliam had a lot in common with Kick's father and 2 older brothers. He brought his mistress to the dinner table and enjoyed living life without regard to the safety of himself and those he surrounded himself with. He even cheated on his wife Olive on their honeymoon. On top of everything else, Fitzwilliam was nearly 10 years older than Kick and was a Protestant. Yet Kick was totally enamored with Fitzwilliam. She left behind many of her previous scruples about sex and morality when he came into the picture. She dated a married man, began wearing fancy lingerie, and went on birth control. Ironically, she showed up at Lady Fitzwilliam's dinner table, just as Gloria Swanson had appeared at the Kennedys years earlier. Though she had once defended and tried to shield her mother from her father's behavior, now Kick was doing the same thing to someone else. Eunice was with her during her visit to Fitzwilliam's home, but had no idea about the truth of Kick's relationship with the Earl. The majority of the Kennedys, barring Jack, were unaware of the affair for almost 2 years. She told her brother, "I found my Rhett Butler at last." Jack was jealous that he had never been in love like that, but was also glad that Kick had found love again. The intensity of Kick's feelings for Fitzwilliam blindsided her friends, as it appeared she loved Fitzwilliam more than she did Billy. A friend observed, as she talked about Fitzwilliam, the man sounded like the hero of Out of Africa, a professional Englishman, a charming rogue. Rarely in life do you see someone so bubbling over with love, everything that love should be, every bit of it. Poor old Billy Hartington. Evelyn Waugh, writer and friend of Kick's, referred to him as King Dandy and Scum. He was not the only one concerned. Several of Kick's friends were shocked and horrified by her new relationship. They felt that Kick was only attracted to Fitzwilliam due to their physical chemistry, which would not last. Fitzwilliam had a terrible reputation, and they feared that she would end up betrayed and humiliated, like the Earl's current wife. Waugh told Kick, "If you want to commit adultery or fornication and can't resist, do it, but realize what you are doing and don't give the final insult of apostasy." Andrew Cavendish, Kick's brother-in-law, contemplated intervening and expressing his concerns to Kick. However, he feared that she would interpret his objections to the relationship as a covert plea not to abandon his dead brother, and decided not to say anything. By early 1948, Kick was planning on marrying Fitzwilliam after he obtained a divorce. She traveled to America that February, resolved to tell her parents about her new relationship. Though her visit lasted 2 months, she waited until it was nearly over to break the news. She was crestfallen when Rose threatened to cut Kick off from her parents and siblings and to disinherit her. She even threatened to divorce Joe if he was not on her side. If she married Fitzwilliam, a married Protestant, Kick would surely be damned, in addition to every other earthly punishment she would suffer. Kick was even more devastated by the silence of her father. He was always in her corner, but this time it seemed he was siding with Rose. Kick would not agree to break things off with Fitzwilliam before returning to London, so Rose followed her for 3,000 miles, where they fought for 4 days straight. She had failed to prevent her daughter's sacrilege marriage before, given the war. But this time, with the stakes higher than before, she wasn't backing down. Neither of them would. Rose's stance was clear and unmovable, but Kick was determined to get her father's blessing before moving ahead with her plans. Joe promised her he would find a way to make the marriage happen. In May of 1948, Kick asked him to meet her and Fitzwilliam in Paris to discuss possible solutions, which he agreed to. Fitzwilliam said that if Joe refused to let them get married, "I'll go to the Pope and offer to build him a church." Before their meeting with Joe, Fitzwilliam wanted to spend a weekend in Cannes. Kick excitedly packed 2 suitcases, filled with her fancy clothes, her lingerie, her birth control, and her jewelry, for their rendezvous in the south of France. As she left her apartment, Kick asked her housekeeper to wish her luck. She replied, "Should I cross my fingers?" "Yes, both hands," Kick said. After departing England, their plane stopped in Paris to refuel. The pilot told them they would need to be back by 5 p.m. in order to beat a storm that was brewing in the Rhone Valley. In the meantime, Kick and Fitzwilliam met some of his friends for a boozy lunch on the Champs-Élysées. By the time they arrived back at the airport, the pilot informed them that it was too late. It was no longer safe to fly. Fitzwilliam, undeterred, cajoled the pilot to take off, and likely paid him off. The plane departed Paris and headed directly into the storm shortly thereafter. During the plane's final 20 minutes, the occupants endured a terrifying ordeal. The aircraft was thrown around in violent winds. A wing ripped off. Both engines became detached. The tail was torn away. Finally, the plane crashed into a mountain. All aboard were killed. Kick's shoes flew off due to the impact of the crash. She was still wearing her wedding ring. People in the surrounding town found the wreck 4 hours later, and Kick was identified by her passport. As he slept in his hotel room at the Ritz in Paris, Joe was awoken by a phone call. A friend had been alerted of the news of Kick's death by the Boston Globe. Joe was too shocked to speak and made no statement to the press. A half an hour after receiving the tragic news, he wrote a letter paying tribute to his beloved daughter. No one who ever knew her didn't feel that life was much better than that minute, and probably we know so little about the next world that we must think that they wanted just such a wonderful girl for themselves. We must not feel sorry for her, but for ourselves. Joe traveled south to the site of the crash to identify Kick's body. He hoped that it was a case of mistaken identity on the train ride there. Unfortunately, when he arrived, he had to accept that Kick was gone. The Duke and the Duchess of Devonshire offered to bury Kick in their family plot near Chatsworth. Joe, who expected Jack to make plans for Kick's transport and burial in the United States, agreed, perhaps out of shock and weariness, not knowing what else to do. Like her wedding, Only one Kennedy would be present at her funeral, the one who loved her most of all. Debo Mitford recalled that at the funeral, Joe's clothes were wrinkled and that he was crumpled just like his suit. I never saw anything like it. Rose Kennedy refused to attend her daughter's funeral. She believed that her daughter's death was retribution for her sin and that she got what she deserved. Lem Billings, Jack's best friend, said that Rose said of her daughter's death, "That plane crash was God pointing his finger at Kik and saying no." When Joe received Kik's belongings, he was shocked to find that she was taking contraception. All three families involved went into damage control. The Cavendishes arranged for the English papers to report that Kik and Peter were merely friends, and that a chance meeting led Kik to being offered a seat on his doomed plane. Joe used his contacts in the United States to spin a similar narrative around his daughter's death. The New York Daily News ran a story about Kik with the headline, "Chance Invite Sends Kennedy Girl to Her Death." Rose may have viewed Kik's death as retribution for incurring God's wrath, but Kik was determined to live life on her own terms, something not many women in the Kennedy family, or society as a whole, did at that time. She may have become lost on the way. Her relationship with the Earl may have been a misguided attempt to replace Billy and to become the woman of influence she longed to be. Unfortunately, this led to her premature death. A friend of the Cavendishes stated, "I have always felt that her life in a way ended with darling Billy, and that without his help, she had lost the rudder that controlled her life, and the forces of her being would always have been pulling her in different ways." In the decades that followed, the Kennedys rarely uttered Kik's name. This may have been due to the trauma of losing her, or to the fear of people knowing the truth about her death, or, most likely, a combination of both. Robert Kennedy named his firstborn daughter after his sister, but would not let anyone call her Kik. After his visit to Chatsworth, JFK wrote Lady Alice a kind letter, thanking her for the arrangements she had made for his sister. He was particularly touched by the inscription on her tombstone, which he had called appropriate and moving. Kik's epitaph reads, "Joy she gave, joy she has found." Thank you very much for watching. I'm the Affair Archivist, and if you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe, and join me next time as we delve into another affair from history.